What's going on, everybody? Welcome to LUMIX Live, or welcome back to LUMIX Live. We've got hopefully, I think, an informative and fun session for everybody that's joining us. We are kicking off, or I guess more like resetting our schedules. You've had a couple of false starts over the last couple of months trying, with the transition to this new channel. But essentially, once a month, we will be holding these dedicated AMA streams. So ask us anything. These will be the opportunities where you have essentially free reign to just ask us whatever you want to ask us. Now, some caveats with that. Obviously, I can't talk about future planning, future product, future firmware, things like that. I'm not going to comment on questions like, where is this camera? What about this? Where is this firmware? Like stuff like that at this point, because this isn't an appropriate platform for that, at least within the bounds of LUMIX Live for AMAs and stuff like that. But please don't worry about asking those questions. You can keep asking them. Just know that I'm not going to necessarily answer them here. If there are things that I can say about different things, I'll try to comment when I can. But in general, the whole purpose of these streams are so that you can be connected directly to us. You can voice your opinions. You can voice things that you want to see us do in the future. If you have questions about how things work, if you have questions about how to, or like what is the process behind why we do certain things, this is that platform. You get to talk directly to us. You don't have to wade through the different forums. You don't have to wade through, comments from people who do not know any of this stuff, and you get to speak directly to the brand. This is also one of those places where if you've joined us when we were on the LUMIX USA channel, there's also a lot of opportunity for all of you to share your knowledge. There are a lot of you that have made some comments or asked certain questions, and if it's something that I didn't know, inevitably somebody in the chat may have an answer or may have a suggestion or a comment. So use this as that opportunity. We're gonna continue doing these streams at least once a month, like I said, so that it's a dedicated broadcast just for these kinds of questions. And then we'll also be doing some more targeted topic discussions on a bi-weekly basis. So essentially we'll do a full-blown AMA. Then 2 weeks later, we'll do a topic focused stream. And on those topic focused streams, we're not going to be doing like an open AMA like we used to, where it was any question, I can just answer it. They'll be very specific to those topics. So if for some reason you join us on one of those streams and you have general open-ended questions, you can leave them in that chat, but know that there's going to be a dedicated stream where we can dig deeper into those. These streams will also have the opportunity to be much longer. So normally we try to keep them close to about an hour for scheduling reasons. But ultimately, if we need to run these much longer, if the conversation's going really, really strong, I have enough space that we can just keep running them longer and longer. These will also be archived on the Panasonic LUMIX channel, so you'll have access to go back to them and review some of the things that we talk about. We're going to work on making sure that now that it's not a weekly deluge of videos, we're going to work to make sure that we can get at least some timestamping done for some generalized topics. I won't necessarily be able to do every single question, but this way there's a little bit easier to search through them, get to where you want an answer in case you don't have time to watch the entire stream itself. Some of you may have noticed that on this particular channel, on the channel that you're watching on, the comment section is currently disabled on the live stream videos. This is something that we are working to change within the platform. Because this is a much more broad global scale channel versus the USA channel, where it was essentially me and a couple other people that would monitor questions and be able to, make sure that if there were things dropped into the comment section, we could make sure that either we got answers or that there wasn't anything dumb happening in the comment section. We were able to keep those open. On this channel, it's just going to take us a little bit longer, so bear with us. I understand that some people, and I really do like having the comments on so that you can leave questions that maybe you don't get asked or don't get to ask on the stream. But for right now, and even moving forward, if you do have questions and you do want to have longer form conversations with us, that's where you can join us over on the Discord channel. Link is down in the description. Over on the Discord channel, I am active there. We also do AMAs over there, over chat, so that you can ask us longer questions. We can do a little bit more long-term things. And then even between the AMAs, you've got access to be able to just tag me in a question over there. So if Discord is available in your region, and if you haven't already joined us over there, please take a look at it. It is a really awesome community. It's very much like this, but you just get a longer kind of tail of being able to ask us questions. There are also things like suggestions channels over there, so if you've got things that you want our engineers to see or maybe consider, you've got an entire channel over on the Discord server where you can drop those. There's troubleshooting channels as well, so if it's specifically about troubleshooting, feature, a capability, whatever, you've got a dedicated platform. It's general camera talk, and if you're someone who's really proud about your photography and videography, there's also the Share Your Work channel, so you can share your work, be proud of it, let other people see it. It's a really fun community that's been built up. Huge props to Matthew Danew for creating the Discord channel. We came in with some support on the back end to be able to kind of help it grow to the next level. And yeah, I look forward to seeing y'all over there as well. So, like the title says, this is our open AMA, and that was my long spiel for the first one coming back into this new series. If you have questions that you want me to try to address during the stream, make sure to tag at Panasonic LUMIX Video, like you see people doing in the chat already. It could be any topic: photography, videography, feature, troubleshooting, whatever it is. Feel free to ask me in there. Tagging just helps me see the question so that I can try to answer to it. With that caveat of what I mentioned before, if you're asking about stuff like future planning, future product, things like that, know that I may not answer those questions if I don't have anything to say about it, because we typically don't comment on future product and planning unless it's an official thing that we've made an announcement and press release and all that fun stuff for. So, now that all of that is done, and I can take a sip to make sure that my voice doesn't completely go, let us take a look through some of these questions. Let's see here. First one. When is a 60p 4:3 mode on the GH7 without a crop at any 4K resolution? So one of the challenges with the GH7 is that because all of the modes come down from the full resolution of the sensor, you run into some processing bottlenecks. So that means that while the sensor hardware is capable of doing, I think it's capable of doing like all the way up to 120 frames per second in the full area, processing is where you kind of run into some of the bottlenecks. Being able to process that much data, being able to mitigate and manage the thermals of it. So that's where some of those challenges are with it. On that particular series, things have to be very buttoned up as far as reliability. If there are reliability issues with thermals or things like that, those modes typically we won't see them come even in a firmware update. That being said, we do get the question a lot, so anytime it does get asked, I do propose it over to the engineering and the planning team. It's also one of the benefits of the Discord channel is that when you put stuff in the suggestions or troubleshooting or asking anything on that platform, the engineering and the planning team do see those comments. So it's not really anything that I can say one way or another about it other than we've taken that comment and we've passed it over to the engineers, but the current understanding is that the overall system isn't necessarily able to do it because it would always have to come down from the full sensor resolution for that. With the apparent cancellation of 3 to 4 micro four thirds lenses, we are getting caught in the tsunami of rumors or opinions about the imminent death of Micro Four Thirds systems. Any official news or updates? So I've said this over on the Discord channel, and I know that that's not necessarily going to be the widest reach for people to see the information. Some lenses have been quote unquote discontinued in Japan. The difference is that a lot of these things are being replaced. This kind of thing happens a lot in the general industry these days as certain components go out of like production. They have to be replaced, and when stuff like that happens, you typically have to release a new version of the product with either some minor changes or minor updates, stuff like that. But the lenses as a whole are not discontinued or canceled or anything like that. It's sensationalism, rumors that are being built up for websites because they want traffic and they want to stir the pot. Anyone, if you do a little bit of research, you see that they're not discontinued. There's a very small section of it. So our commitment to Micro Four Thirds is still strong. It is still one of the core components of our business. Just because certain things get, for whatever reason, component discontinuation or a change of piece, even things as far as like changing of where it's manufactured can cause some of these things. Recently in the United States, if you've purchased an S12, you may have noticed that there's been a slight change. They went from manufactured in China to Vietnam, and part numbers change because of that in some cases. So a lot of times people are just doom and gloom on certain things because that's just what they want to do. But the series is not discontinued. There may be certain items that you see that go out of, for their part number, go out of production within that particular part number, but they eventually come back under a different part number. So, let's see here. Any plans to open the Cold Shoe API to third-party manufacturers for things like microreceivers? It's been asked, actually, a couple of times. I know I've asked about it a lot when we've had our internal meetings, like when I've gone to Japan or when we, do any kind of conversations about that. I think one of the things to keep in mind, just to kind of level set an understanding, our communication protocols, or the way we communicate to the accessories in the hot shoe, is through the pin interface here. It's not necessarily like a multi-shoe, so it's a little bit different. And sometimes we draw equivalency to other potential options that are out there without necessarily understanding what the full breadth of capabilities are. That's not to say that it's not possible. It's just a different methodology. So some things that, people want to see may not be possible, but know that, it is something that has been brought up numerous times. It goes hand in hand with like a lot of the questions we get about like, well, what about Bluetooth audio? I know I'm opening a can of worms with that comment, but all of that kind of stuff does get evaluated and kind of talked about and kind of planned out to see, is it something that's feasible? Would it fall within what's a like kind of acceptable use case for it? So certain things like Bluetooth audio is a good example of this. We get a lot of questions about, well, can't you just set it up where you can have Bluetooth directly into the camera because it has Bluetooth, or have headphone monitoring directly into the camera because we have Bluetooth? What often gets missed is, because this is similar to the hot shoe, what often gets missed is that there are different connection types for Bluetooth, like low latency or aptX or all the different kind of variants. And most cameras don't have any of that stuff. They don't have the same connectivity that like your phone may have for low latency kind of audio transfer, at least at this particular time in history. Things could always change in the future with that kind of stuff as development kind of expands. But a lot of that kind of is fit in with the entire picture of the product. Can the processor do it? Is it something that's low enough latency? We already know that latency is a very, I I want to say latency is one of those kind of more noticeable things when it comes to this world. So if your audio is lagging or there's latency in what you hear in the audio versus what you're seeing, if it's not within a very particular range of acceptance, it wouldn't be a good thing. It would also be viewed very badly. So a lot of times that's why you don't see anything like that. And then when stuff like that does happen, it's like all of a sudden like, oh, hey, it's here kind of thing. Not saying that that's the case, but a lot of time and effort goes into making sure that the experience of using some of these things that a lot of people want is done in a responsible way that actually moves the needle forward for creators, and not just slapping something in there because, hey, it's technically doable, but maybe it's not the best experience for the use cases. So same thing with the hot shoe, so the pin connections. Let's see, a bunch of questions about the lenses, which we answered already. Maybe the only one, but would love an updated G100D with PDAF and potentially IBIS. I find everyone I suggest the S9 and L10. It's out of their budget. Yeah, it's definitely something we've had a lot of people ask questions about. I think understanding that PDAF brings the new engine, brings the new sensor, brings new thermal barriers, because as hardware gets newer and newer and more advanced, especially with the sensor that we use in like the L10, the G9 Mark II, the GH7, because it shares the very similar same sensor, the hardware becomes much more demanding. So you have some constraints on how small you can build certain things while still managing thermals. And in some cases, it can even go to some basic level things like, you know, do you fully disable certain features of it? So there's a lot of balance that has to be brought into when you start trying to go down much lower in price point for an entry level option. But it is always being evaluated. At what point does the manufacturing, does the component costs, at what point does the reliability of the system overall get to where hardware and technology have caught up to be able to bring that stuff down into smaller platforms? I would say the L10 is a massive step forward, with a caveat for a lot of people to understand that the L10 is possible because of the multi-aspect design use of the sensor, as well as the fact that the video functionality is definitely not a core component of that camera. Yes, it has a lot of capabilities because we're LUMIX, we can't help ourselves. But in certain categories of products, it starts to, you have to have an understanding. Moving from a non-stabilized hard-mounted sensor to a stabilizer-mounted sensor can increase thermals, can increase challenges with being able to dissipate all that heat. So as you start to go through, it goes back to that other point. When technology and pieces kind of come together, it takes a while for it to actually come into something that would be a reliable tool to be released, and not just something to throw out there just for the sake of throwing something out there. Where should Nordic customers go to buy the DMW SFU3A? Is apparently on back order at every reputable seller that ships internationally. So I actually, at least I can't speak to European distribution of it. Outside of, just keep checking with your dealers. I know in the US, inventory for the SFU3A should be coming into stock for the dealer network as well as our website. So should be coming back into stock pretty soon. Whoa, thanks, YouTube. Let's see here. So we did that one, we did that one. Can we get our own LUMIX RAW video codec, like NRAW, in the S12 or S1R2? I mean, we have ProRes RAW right now, so that's just kind of where we're at right now. What are your autofocus settings on the S5 Mark II and the S1 Mark II? It depends. It really does depend. In general, if I'm using our cameras like I used to shoot film, which would be focus and recompose, it's center point focus. That's either one area or one area plus. I'm in single autofocus, and then just focus, recompose. If I'm doing anything where it's a lot more sporadic, or I'm not doing things like landscape or astro stuff like that, then it's in continuous autofocus. I'll usually have my camera set up to one area or one area plus, and then I'll use my subject detection options there. For that particular setup, when the subject that I have identified as what I want to track or identify is touching the AF box, so my AF box will go where I want my framing to be. It's basically goes centered into where I want my framing to be. When the subject crosses or touches the box, subject detection is enabled at that point. It locks on and ignores the focus point. But the reason I do it that way is when I don't have a subject being detected, or there's not a subject, in the frame kind of thing, I have my focus point, so I'm not giving all the control over to the camera to say, hey, pick a focus point for me. I come from I would argue, maybe a little bit more of a traditional mindset when it comes to the way focus should work. Yes, there are a lot of advancements that have been done to help give up some of the control in determining what you want to focus on, and that can be great for some users. I approach it with more intent, so I'm going to tell the camera what it is I want to focus on, and that's how it's going to be. So that's just how I have mine set up. When it comes to things like the AF settings, so speed, sensitivity, motion prediction, stuff like that, that's where I will change it up depending on the scenario that I'm in. If I'm just casual, travel, like I recently, kind of recently, I was in Japan for vacation with the L10. I went up to North Carolina for a week with the L10 as well. When it's casual stuff and I'm just taking a camera because I always have a camera with me and I'm just traveling on vacation, that's where I'll have it set to AF custom setting 1. So that would be just the basic kind of do-all AF settings for it, for continuous autofocus. If I'm doing anything that has more motion or more activity, that's where I will change it to like set 2, 3, or 4 in the appropriate setup. And then sometimes I go in there and I change the variables within each one of them. You can save them within each of those, so you don't have to stick to just what our recipes are for the different AF custom settings. But I do have them set up in various different ways so that, hey, I just go in, I know I'm going to be photographing, say, some kind of wildlife because I'm going on a nature walk. It'll do fine for my static type photography, but I want to be able to quickly have it react when I want to go out there and, a deer is running through the woods or something like that. I can easily go in and just say, like, hey, for this particular day, I'm on set 3 and I'm good to go and I'm in continuous focus. If I'm going into landscape work, I don't need it to be as responsive, so I can tune the system back to the basic mode and then just flip to single AF and just go from there. The whole idea of our system is to be immensely flexible so that you have the control in the environment to tune the system to exactly how you want it, versus taking a broad, kind of swipe at it and saying, well, this should be good for pretty much everything. Historically, the broad stroke approach is not necessarily the best. It's kind of a way to give yourself a lot of false positives. It can be very beneficial and useful, but it leaves you to much more variability in the actual results that you get. So for now, that's how our system is designed. We are always listening and, taking feedback as to options that people want to see in the system for those that do prefer to work the other way. And I'm not saying one way is better than the other. It just depends that knowing how many different types of photographers and videographers and general creators there are out there. We all have different needs and different desires for the systems. So yeah, there's variability in some of these things, but our current system is designed the way it is. So for me, it's changing the different AF custom set modes depending on the subject type that I want, and then using typically one area or one area plus. Sometimes I'll use zone if it's like, very, very amateur level wildlife photography, and then just kind of go from there. The L mount 24 to 60 shows that IBIS is so good that we can go without lens stabilization in this focal range. Would be a good idea to get more compact MFT lenses too. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely, kind of balances that are there. In general, if you look at our history in lenses, typically things below 50 millimeter usually don't have stabilization in the lens. A lot of times it can make the lenses overly bulky in order to actually make the stabilizer kind of useful for like our dual IS system. And on the related side, they can also, in a lot of cases, make them more complex, which means more expensive, which means harder to fix if something were to go wrong. So a lot of times in wider angle lenses, you won't see that as much. And that's primarily because if you're basing your measurements off CIPA, their ratings are, and they've updated them. They have a central rating and then they have a periphery rating. In-body stabilization is more than enough to compensate and do a better job than lens stabilization for, mid tele to ultra wide. And it does flip on the far other side for ultra wide, so like anything below 18 millimeter. And that's not necessarily a stabilization issue. It's more down to just the light paths, how light bends when it's coming through those lenses, depending on if they're rectilinear lenses, if they're not rectilinear lenses, how tight the coverage is designed over the sensor area. So there's a lot of conversation that goes into that. So, yeah. Have issue on the GH7 with the monitor LUT gets corrupt and it looks like false colorish. Happened 3 times while filming. Is this known / working on? So Sky, the vast majority of troubleshooting that I've done for some users where they have similar kinds of issues, it usually comes down, and I'll say usually because obviously I don't have your camera, so I can't necessarily check your camera and your LUTs. Usually it comes down to either a corrupted LUT file, which can be any number of things, the way it was generated, the tool that was used to create it, if there are parameters in the actual creation of the LUT that basically the camera doesn't know what to do with, or there could be situations where the precision of the LUT may be causing an issue. If it's, you're supposed to use 17-point LUTs in the camera, but you can use 33-point as well. If you try to load a 65-point LUT, the camera, at least the newer cameras, will actually tell you that you can't use this. And even in LUMIX Lab, it'll tell you that you can't use 65-point. They're too big, they're too high precision. And honestly, the way our LUT system works, it's not needed to go to 65. You can use a 33, you can use a 17 because of where in our pipeline we do the conversion for it. It's kind of the special sauce with real-time LUT. So without actually having a little bit more detail and potentially seeing the LUT itself, it'd be a little hard for me to troubleshoot here. This would be one of those good things like over on the Discord channel if you've got access, because it's something that's likely going to take a longer thread of potential troubleshooting. So if you reach out to me over on Discord, we can chat. I can take a look at the LUT, try it on my cameras, see if I can replicate the issue, that kind of thing. So LUMIX Lab Android app crashes when I edit photos, 3.0 and 3.01. 3.0.1. Is there a fixed plan? I'm not the only one. A lot of comments on the Android store mention this issue. The first question that I ask everybody, especially on the Android side, is what phone are you using and what processor does your phone have? as a kind of example, I use a Z Fold 7 and I have a Pixel 9 Pro, and both of those devices work perfectly fine. I have no issues, no crashes, no problems whatsoever. There is, knowing the scope of Android devices, there are also like Exynos processors that are used on some Samsung devices that are newer in the US. Usually they stick to Snapdragon. Some of those things could be causing a problem, but the more information that we can get, aside from just, hey, it crashes, what's wrong? Let us know what phone, let us know, and honestly, letting us know what phone and what region it's from, that's usually enough for us to figure out, okay, well, what processor is it, to try to find a common thread, because in the general scape of Android devices, it's not a problem. In select situations, I have seen the comments as well, and I've troubleshot a couple of them where it's been, especially early on, it was certain versions of processors were having some issues, and then after we did an update, everything was fine. So yeah, if you can get me more information, I think it's Sebastian, as far as what phone, and if you know what processor, that's cool. Otherwise, just let me know what phone and what region it's from. I can usually find that information out pretty quickly. Let's see here. Are you planning any new lenses or lens alliances? We need to allow a collab also with built-in, and will built-in ND ever come to LUMIX? Is it possible with IBIS? So as far as like any kind of lenses or stuff like that, future, we don't talk about it, other than we do have an updated L mount roadmap that does have 2 future optics on there. You can take a look for the LUMIX roadmap online for that. I do not have details as far as focal lengths or anything like that to do with those particular upcoming lenses, or even time frame with it. And I don't know, I don't think Laowa is an L-Mount Alliance member, so that changes a little bit of the dynamic, as far as, what to kind of expect from them. The nice thing with the L-Mount Alliance is that because it is the Alliance, the way it's designed, when a company is a member of the Alliance, they have access to a ton of information to be able to build native lenses for the ecosystem. So that means if you're buying our camera, if you buy Sigma's lens, it's a native performing lens. The only differences that happen between, lens design and camera is just what that company chooses to build their lens for, what their priorities are. And that could, that influences things like, what types of motors are being used, how corrected is the optically, what is the aperture, the speed ratings, like all those different things are up to the lens maker. So while they have all of the information they need to communicate and operate properly across on the setup, usually it comes down to what is that optics company's goal with that lens. There's no influence between any of the manufacturers for any of that stuff. Yes, we build around on a central, platform for communication and for certain pieces of technology to ensure compatibility if someone is going to be part of the alliance. But in the end, everybody is their own company. So there are, walls up in certain aspects because we're all individual companies. We're all selling our own products. We just happen to build around this one central standard. So. Just got your L10 today, and it's a great little camera. Yeah, I love the L10. The L10 is an amazing camera for me. Can you make the S9 screen brightness go brighter automatically? I need to set it to +3 manually to view the screen outdoors. Auto doesn't go so bright. Usually, there's not going to be an out-of-the-box option to have it set, especially in automatic, to go to a certain level. There are various different reasons or, kind of specifications that have to be met when it comes to screen brightness and longevity and measurements and all those kinds of things. So you have the options to manually go in and change those things. It's a common thing when it comes to pretty much any electronic. How they're designed out of the box is how they're going to be. but you do have some change capabilities for yourself. So it's not, I doubt, and actually I can almost guarantee, we're not going to change how bright the automatic can go, but that's why you have the +3 for manual screen brightness. Which cameras or camcorders will do 4K wireless RTMP streaming without a phone or laptop? It seems my S1 IIe is limited to 1080p unless I buy a Streambox or use a laptop or phone. The S1 II series, the S5 IIX, I think the GH7, I think the G9 II. It's been a while since I looked at the G9 II as far as what the live streaming stuff can do. They do have the option to do 4K. The difference is if you want to do it wirelessly, you would need to hardwire to your phone for the for basically the internet connection. So when you're setting the internet connection up for live streaming directly from the camera over RTMP-S, which is what the cameras now have to do, when you're setting it up for that, you can choose to be USB tethered to your device for the streaming side of it. And the reason that's capable is because you can run into additional bandwidth problems and loss when you go from Wi-Fi connecting from the camera to the phone, where the phone or whatever your hotspot is processing the information and then sending it to the service that you've chosen, versus if you're hardwiring to the hotspot effectively. So whether that is hardwiring USB-C to Ethernet, because I think you can still do that, or if you're hardwiring USB-C to USB-C on your phone and in the app telling it, hey, use the USB-C as basically as a modem at that point, that should unlock the 4K options for you when it comes to the cameras. I know at bare minimum the S5 IIX can do that, the GH7 can do that. I have not tested the S1 II series because I haven't had to in a little while. At least I haven't had a situation where I needed to live stream away from the studio. But I can take a look at that, and that's another thing like over on Discord we could always chat about as well. Let's see here. Will LUMIX ever work Bluetooth with DJI RS gimbals? Yeah, we do. The S1 II series, you can connect Bluetooth to the RS. I think it's the RS4 series and newer. Yeah, so that exists already. So here, L10 and DMS1 question. In Spain for the Eclipse and playing around with the L10, in MP4 Lite, a lot of the audio options are grayed out, assuming it's mic-controlled 2 channels. So the DMS, when you're in MP4 Lite, where is my L10? I think my L10's back here. Yeah. I don't have my DMS1 with me. So when you are in MP4 Lite, there's a couple things to notice. So in MP4 Lite, your audio options are, so you're in AAC for audio options. When you go to MOV, which is what opens up all of the capabilities, you have linear PCM audio. So to really get the most out of the DMS1, you want to be in the MOV options. That's where you can get things like 32-bit. That's where you can get the enhancements for things like 4-channel. Because of how essentially MP4 Lite is designed. The MP4 wrapper coming with AAC audio, just different setups between the two. It's designed to be much more user-friendly for mobile editing, mobile delivery, stuff like that, where you typically don't have things like 4-channel, like editing capability in mobile editors. And at least the last I checked, mobile editors also they do have some 32-bit float capabilities to work with, but they're not as complex as you would have on a computer. So for that particular setup, Fielding, it's just going to be the 2 channels that record. You're not going to have any of the enhanced functionality with it. So I do not believe you get 4-channel audio with it or any of the kind of controlling that way. So Let's see here. Thanks for the honest response. I was asking because we had 60p 4.3 without crop on the GH5. Yeah, it's down to hardware. The new sensor is way more processor intensive, or it's way more capable. So that's kind of one of the things. It doesn't necessarily grow linearly with newer cameras. As newer cameras come out, sometimes sensor hardware advancements move faster. So, and there's more headroom in sensor development. Usually you're not going to just build a sensor for the full amount of processing power that you have today. Usually you're building it for what you can do down the line. So sometimes you just run into that convergence of, yeah, the hardware sensor wise is capable to do more, but processing still needs to, have a little, maybe a next generation or stuff like that to really take full advantage of the capabilities. Let's see here. We need more S Pro prime lenses. I personally would agree. I would like to see more S Pro lenses. But outside of that, that's just my personal thing I'd like to see. Where did that go? Official grip partners like Small Rig would be nice to brand as LUMIX, so to make the S9 ergonomics seem more intentional and less make it less like it's a mindful customization option. Do you mean to have Small Rig literally brand their parts as LUMIX, or have them build them for us and then we brand it LUMIX? There's weird slippery slopes with some of that stuff. Having an accessory partner build something that is, branded for the company. I don't think any company does that, because we don't have the ability to do quality control if it's not something that we build. So unless we're able to do full-blown quality control, we can inspect, it lives to our standards, we have control over the entire pipeline. You typically won't see branded accessories unless they come from us. And then the flip side of that is, because we're not really a major accessory manufacturer, for our own stuff, we do build some accessories that are, core to our, capabilities for our cameras. Usually they'll be, usually priced within what would be expected for some of this stuff. So yeah, it's an interesting area, Beefy, but primarily letting accessory partners and stuff like that, even if we are, an official partner or we work with them, we do work with accessory partners very closely with things like, CAD designs as to exactly how the product is going to be physically designed so that accessories can be designed properly. And it's not guesswork to know is it going to fit? I think if you look at the L10 and the launch of the Small Rig accessories, that's kind of a really big point about it, that the accessory grip that Small Rig made, one, it's a pretty close color match. It's almost indistinguishable between the finish on the camera and the finish that the Small Rig grip uses. And it fits like a glove for the design. So there was close collaboration there to make sure that the accessory is done correctly, so that, one, we don't necessarily have to make it, but the accessory company that has the expertise in making stuff like that is able to manufacture and provide a good product at a good price for you, the actual users. So, DMW SFU3A availability in the US. You should see availability coming back actually very soon. Whether it's on our website, the shop.panasonic website, or through our dealer network. Yeah. That question was asked and answered already. Let's see here. Fair point. I would just love to have more people using LUMIX cameras, but if a lower tier market doesn't make sense, then it's all good. It's not necessarily that a lower tier market doesn't make sense. We have different options for different, categories of cameras. It's not... Of course, it always does make sense to try to get more and more people at a more and more affordable price point into the ecosystem and into, kind of the world of LUMIX. And that's definitely something that we do focus on. I mean, if you look at the S9 as far as barrier to enter into full frame, it's been getting lower and lower and lower. I think the fact is a lot of us, myself included, because I do this all the time, and actually just went through this with, for those that follow the video gaming industry, that follow with the Steam machine, I just went through this too, where, you know, the barrier to enter into PC and all this kind of stuff because of component costs and tariffs and all of these other things have just collectively made everything in the electronics world more expensive. But a lot of stuff that's coming out, if you look at, you know, accounting for inflation and stuff like that in the various different regions, they're all pretty much in line with where they've been for a while, because a lot of companies are, you know, kind of eating as much as we can. So when it comes to lower tier, quote unquote, lower tier entry level products, this is where you start looking at, well, what is a reasonable product to manufacture for that? Does the current round of components that are accessible, that are readily available to support volume, to not have to split between different, you know, product lines, stuff like that, what is available? What can be produced? And does it actually produce anything substantial for the users, for people that are going to be getting into this? And for some, can it hit a price point that some users are really looking forward to get into or can afford to get into? Right now, there is a massive trend, and we've seen this for a couple of years now. There's a massive trend towards premium, quote unquote, premium compact cameras, where interchangeable lens is just not something that a lot of people are, you know, kind of, or a lot of newer people are prioritizing for their purchases. So we get a lot of questions like with the L10 versus wanting to see an interchangeable lens camera come out. Well, the fact that the L10 is still back ordered, we still are producing as much as we can, and we're ramping up production, but it is still back ordered and is constantly, the second we get inventory in, it's out and sold, kind of contradicts a lot of the ecosphere that a lot of us live in, where it's, you know, the only way forward is an interchangeable lens and blah, blah, blah. You need future compatibility and you need all this, you know, possible future compatibility. A lot of people that are getting into photography right now don't have that desire. And it's a market and it's a user base that is a bit foreign to those of us that have been in this industry for quite some time. So when you see cameras like the L10 being as successful as they are, it's one of those kind of indicators that, hey, let's all take a step back. What has actually changed in the world right now? Are people tired of over complex? Are they tired of, you know, I want to go and I want to be able to have all of the potential flexibility that I could ever possibly want, but then also have the realization that they probably are never going to use any of that other stuff. So they're going with something that fits much more into what they actually want to use it for. And people are smart. They do their research, they do their evaluation, they make their decisions, because these things are not inexpensive. So that being said, you know, like there's a difference in what the quote unquote lower tier has evolved into. Lower quote unquote tier doesn't appear to be as desired for interchangeable. It doesn't mean that there isn't a market for that. So I want to be clear about that. It doesn't mean that there's no desire to build cameras or accessories or things like that for a smaller, more compact. It's just that at this time, there's not as much of a, there's not as much data supporting it. And then you add on the physical side of being able to shrink things down with the increasing demands of that particular user base. You know, you want it ultra small, but you want unlimited recording. You want it ultra small, but you want to have all of the physical controls and the brightest and best EVFs and the biggest and brightest screens. So you start running into some physics issues there where people have to be a little realistic and like, this is what I want. This is what it needs to have, and essentially it becomes as big or as small as it has to be at that perspective. So, let's see here. The problem with ProRes RAW is that it is cropped on the S1R2 like on the Z8, but the Z8 can get uncropped RAW internal with NRAW, and it would be very nice if we can get an LRAW uncropped. It's a fair point. However, I would point to Cine D's testing of the raw performance that we get and our ProRes performance and show that there are reasons why you do that. You can either have a mushy, soft raw or a compressed raw that, you know, has to be processed internally through potentially line skipping or binning and then creating the raw, or you can just use the raw data. When you get to a certain point in this industry, a lot of the higher end cameras would do windowed recording where, you know, if you're going to be doing raw, it should be from the pixel to pixel because you don't want any additional processing or interpretation from the camera to affect it. So there's just different, there's different philosophies when it comes to some of this stuff. Does that mean that that's how it's always going to be? No, not necessarily. But at the current time, that's why we're using ProRes RAW with the cameras. And you do have access to things like B-RAW and ProRes RAW over HDMI if you want to go that route. Those are always options. Yes, they do require you to build the camera out a little bit more. But honestly, that's another one of those areas where I'd say if we take a collective step back and think about situations where you're going to be shooting RAW, often you're going to be using a monitor. At least that's what data tells us in how people use cameras when surveyed. So at that point, it's on the face value, it's a nice, hey, we can do it internally, but oftentimes cameras, even with like a 3.5-inch screen or a 4-inch screen, they often tend to not be necessarily big enough for actual productions where you're really going to need to be using RAW, and they end up using external monitors. So it's a weird convergence of use cases. It's really nice to have, but from an actual, you know, real world use case, they tend to tell a slightly different story, or at least a different version of the story. So, if you could offer one piece of advice to help the company and its users expand the brand, what would it be? Support creators, support photographers, support videographers, support filmmakers. Often the industry gets into the industry. So everything, the internet, all of this stuff. Often it gets to a point where it's essentially like a high school. It's a lot of bickering back and forth. And we're all guilty of this. But I think supporting creators, which is one of the things that's core to Panasonic LUMIX, is we build products to support creative visions, to help, you know, in a lot of our things like the L10, you know, products have taglines or essentially taglines whenever they're launched. If you look, every camera has this. But there is a kind of core message that LUMIX has really focused on since day one, and that is supporting creator, supporting a photographer, supporting a videographer, whatever the term is that defines what we all do in a visual or creative sense. And that's done from the physical side, from the company side, that's done through thoughtful design of cameras and thoughtful design of features. So not gatekeeping features, not saying, you know, open gate is something we should relegate to the high-end cameras because an entry-level person may have no desire for it, or this is a professional feature, why should an S9 have it? We include things like open gate in all of our cameras, all of our modern cameras, because that's just something that's beneficial for everybody. It shouldn't be behind a paywall. It shouldn't be behind a barrier for someone to have to pay to get into that capability. Compressed codecs across the board, being able to deploy things like ProRes and ProRes RAW, which are, you know, ProRes being a fairly solid industry standard still. ProRes RAW being the probably closest to uncompressed RAW that you can get to retain as much information and flexibility as you can. Being able to just add as many tools as we possibly can, while yes, we make photography focused cameras as well, knowing that, because it's software and it's not an additional cost for anything, they should just be included. That's what we do from a product perspective for the community. And I think on the community side, for users to help build brand, to help build your self brand, is the more people lift up the creative community and support filmmakers and photographers and really get into that side of it and showing off what it is you're able to create with the product that you have, the better everything will get, the more people will see it. Yeah, that's my sappy diatribe, I guess, about wanting to see the market and the industry be better. Often cited critique of LUMIX is lack of growth options beyond mirrorless the ecosystem has. What would Panasonic's option when videographers graduate the S1 II and want more? So it's going to kind of depend. It depends on what avenue you kind of go to. I think there's the side of the industry, the much higher end side, where moving to full-fledged cinema cameras is a big shift. So going, that much higher and going way into where you're ultimately rigging everything out and you've got multiple people on set to handle things like lighting and audio and all of that stuff. Yes, that is a big portion of wanting to be able to make a next step up. And that's an area that at this point, unfortunately, we don't have anything in that area. But if you look at the DNA of the S1 II and what we did specifically working with ARRI, there is a path. Being able to move into things like an ARRI if you want to go, because we offer the entire workflow, the entire color processing workflow. You have that capability as of today if you want to kind of go that route. But on the flip side of it, there is also this massive shift of, yes, are these high-end, ultra high-end cinema cameras, needed? Sure. But look at how much work is being done and how much amazing content, whether it's commercial or creative, is being done on these hybrid cameras. Yes, the form factor is one of those things that, can potentially, shift. It all depends on what you as the creator want to grow into next. We understand that there are areas where, people may see us as not having a path, to move into next. But I think with the features and the capabilities that we have in our cameras as of today, you've got such a, area of headroom to grow. And the accessory companies, as far as like how to rig your cameras, are, building a lot of that flexibility to be able to mold your cameras into these different applications, that using the tools that you have as of today can still produce amazing work. Whether or not we move into another series or whether or not we, kind of expand, those things are all unseen at this time. So there's not really anything I can say one way or another as far as that goes. But we are committed to providing the best experience that we can and providing the best tools that we can for users to help in their growth and their journey. So, do you guys expect to celebrate your 25th anniversary anymore this year? Yeah. I mean, I mentioned this over on the Discord that, we get a lot of questions about, when are there going to be more physical meetups? Because we had done one last year, the year before. No, it was last year. We had done some meetups locally, kind of seeing our European team has also done a bunch of meetups as well and kind of cycling through different cities and stuff like that. So we're always planning to do more and more stuff like that. It's a big year. 25th is a very important year for us. 25 years for any kind of electronics company, or honestly any company, is a milestone year. So outside of that, I don't really have details that I can share at this particular point. But just know that this is an important year for us. So. Can you briefly explain how zone focus works like on the S9 for native lenses like the 40mm to be able to somewhat point and shoot? Yeah, so zone focus, or using the zone focus box or setting on our camera, allows you to basically say, like, hey, I want to use this octagon, and I want to position it in an area, and I want to have the AF system ignore everything else about the scene. So that will isolate, at least the way I use it. That allows me to isolate and say, hey, I know I want to frame a very certain way. So if I'm using like rule of thirds, or if I want to use the golden rule, or different ways that each of us kind of use to frame. If I'm using my frame markers and I know, like, hey, I want to be able to have my 9x16 out of this for social posting, I can take that box and I can move it into an area where the framing fits what I need it to fit. The benefit of using it in zone versus one area or one area plus is that, well, one area, just the basic one area, can be as small as a single PDAF point. It can be as big as essentially about 1/8 of the screen. One area plus can be relatively small, but it gives a barrier around. So it gives a little, or not barrier, it gives a little bit of a buffer around the focus point to also give you a little bit of, choice in where it goes. This was big with, when we didn't have these complex AF systems, this one area plus concept was big in the DSLR days, because try to keep a single, when you had 8 PDAF points, it was hard to make sure that you kept that one right where it needs to be. As things move on, one area plus gave you a little bit of a buffer zone to be able to compensate for not being able to keep it exactly on target. Zone expanded that a little bit further. So the zone lets me, like, if I'm going to be using the camera as like a point and shoot, right? Be able to just go snap street photography with it and just know, like, hey, my focus is going to be good. I can leave my subject detection on. So if I'm doing street photography, it's usually going to be people, face and eye, human body selection. So it's all of them. Be in zone so that the focus is going to be in the area of the frame that I want it to be for my framing. And then just go. Leave it in continuous focus and just kind of shoot from the hip like that. If I'm using the L10 and I want to be up with the face like that, I can do that as well. It's just one of the tools that you use. And the zone helps because it's a little bit more forgiving with the area that you're going to be kind of focusing on. No pun intended. So, is there a way to reduce lag when using GH7 with HDMI external monitors or viewfinder app on the USB? So with HDMI, you can turn the audio out over HDMI. Audio out over HDMI, because the way we process to make sure that they are frame to frame synced, can introduce a little bit of latency. When you turn that off, it reduces the latency, because obviously you're not sending the audio track as well. So if you're in a situation where the audio is not an important part of what you're trying to capture over HDMI, that's one thing you can do. If you're using an external audio capture, that's awesome as well. Some monitors will have audio inputs, so you can just run your mics into the monitor itself instead of running them through the camera and over HDMI. Over USB-C, if you're using the LUMIX Flow app, I think it's the same. I haven't tested if it's the exact same, but the latency on USB-C should be faster than HDMI as well. So please forgive me while I make I have a request for a bit of f2.8 tender love and care to the LUMIX S Pro 16-35. Pretty pleased with the cherry on top. Yeah, I would love to see that as well. Why we got MP4 Lite instead of MOV Lite? The camera can repair MOV files on its own in the event of a power loss. So this comes down to compatibility. When you're going to be building something specifically like our MP4 Lite concept, when you're building that, you have to take into account, as a manufacturer, you have to take into account compatibility. That is compatibility between various different mobile devices. That's compatibility between various different operating systems. If you're going to use them on a computer, Mac versus PC versus, whether or not you need to download extra codec capabilities, whether or not the processors or the GPUs can work with them. All of these things come into play when you start looking at, well, what wrapper do you choose for the most compatible option out there? And in that research, MP4 is still the most compatible across iOS, Android, Linux, Windows, Mac OS, all that stuff. It is just the most compatible still. So that's one reason why it's MP4 Lite instead of MOV Lite. The other part of this comes down to bitrate. At what bitrate does the wrapper perform the best? And when you look at the bit rates that we do for MP4 Lite versus the bit rate that you could potentially do in MOV, are there quality differences? How is the engine designed for that compression to go into that wrapper? At what compression is it right at what bit depth? All of these things come into play when developing these different, kind of codecs and wrappers. And I'm saying wrapper for those that don't know. MP4 versus MOV, it's a wrapper. The compression and all those different things, they're slightly different. They're all connected, but in a very base, generic way of describing it. They all interact with each other, but the wrapper is what we're talking about. And the wrapper is what determines whether or not the OS that you're working on is able to actually see it. We see this even if you look online with, higher level use cases. Certain OSs, like Windows OS, unless you download an extension that adds HEIF or HEIC decoding, you wouldn't see the image previews in Windows Explorer. On Mac, it's native and built in. So that's a compatibility issue. If you have to go download something to make it compatible, that makes it harder for a manufacturer to try to make that, or it's less of a reason to pick a particular option for that. So while yes, MOV in the camera has the ability to repair potential broken files, which can be from a power loss, can be from a card failure. As long as there's data there, we can typically recover a bulk of it. So it also depends on when in the write cycle, all of that stuff goes in. Yes, MP4 doesn't have the ability to have the files repaired. MOV does, but at the same time, programs like Wondershare and Wonderfixit or whatever, I forget what the program is that I use, they can also fix MP4s, so there are options there for it. It's just a matter of whether or not the camera can do it internally. So, yeah. Let's see here. What is the normal development time on technology, like imaging apparatus for internal NDs in mirrorless bodies? Patented August 17th, 2023. Tongue firmly planted in cheek when asking. So, oftentimes you will see patents and stuff like that come out from pretty much any company. It could be us, it could be optics manufacturers, it could be phone manufacturers, keyboard manufacturers. Everybody patents an idea. And the reason you do that is because you have an idea. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're developing it right at the moment. You have an idea, you have a creative solution that others were not able to do or would not easily be able to find, following all of the rules that it typically requires to get a patent, typically. And you're doing that because it's a unique capability that your engineering team was able to figure out and do, and it's deserving of a patent. As far as deployment of stuff like that, that's a very different case. People like to say, oh, well, and I'm gonna, Al, this is not you, I'm just doing like the internet voice here. A lot of people in general like to say, oh, well, it was made 3 years ago. Why isn't it a real product yet? It's like, well, because if you look at the history of any patents that have been created, it is way more often that a patented idea is patented and not necessarily deployed right away, because either the cost to deploy isn't something that fits the market that you're trying to or that you've designed it for at the time. The technology is there, but the actual physical way to deploy it is not where you would want it to be for adoption in the market. It is something that you're actively designing, that you're building, that you are working on, but just things just need to go a little bit further before it hits a point that it makes sense to come into a product without some astronomical price. So the patent you're referencing, we've gotten a lot of questions about it. It's a patent that we have, so that's about all I've got on that one. Legitimately, we don't have any other information as far as that goes. Let's see here. Let's see here. Lots of discussion about ProRes RAW. YouTube just jumped all the way to the end of the comment section, so I have to go back up to find where I was. So sorry, everybody. Okay, there we are. Okay. About the S9 brightness. Can there be an FN button mapping to make it faster to go to +3 without EVF? I have to do a lot when walking about. That's something I can mention to the engineering team and say, like, hey, is this something that's possible to do? I don't know, but it is something that we can ask. So, will the S9 support LUMIX Flow? Honestly, I have no idea at this point. The S9, it was designed and launched with LUMIX Lab out of the gate. LUMIX Flow came later for the higher end cameras. So at this point, I honestly don't know. I have my internal opinions on it, but I don't want to cloud conversation on that particular topic. What exactly are the crop factors of E-stabilization for the S5 IIX? I do not have them off the top of my head, but high E-stabilization, I believe. Well, for the cameras that have high E-stabilization, it's the S1 II series. It's like a 1.5-ish crop, I think. That's the one where essentially you can run with the camera and it's going to be stable. Yeah, for the rest of them, I don't know, because it also depends on if you're in full frame, if you're in APS-C, the different ratios that you're working in. Are there plans to implement the option to change the Vlog View Assist LUT when shooting ProRes RAW? Probably not. Last I understood, there's not really any plan to change that because it's ProRes RAW to Vlog for the 709 conversion. But I can bring it up. Obviously, even if I don't have an answer or feedback specifically about the question, it'll always get brought up to the team as something that you all have been asking for. Wish LUMIX gave us a firmware update roadmap. Anything coming for the S1 Mark II body soon? I know people want us to do a firmware update roadmap. There are many reasons why you won't see firmware roadmaps. Yeah, there's many reasons why you won't see firmware roadmaps, and a lot of times it's kind of also the same thing why you don't typically see hardware roadmaps. It's a competitive market. Why would we give our competition sight into what we're working on or what we're planning to do in the future? Why on earth would we ever do that? Yeah. Just got my Sigma 70-200 f2.8. Dual IS is not available on it. Will Dual IS be available in the future for L-mount Alliance lenses? I have to double check on that lens because I haven't followed up on the most up-to-date information about how the IS works on the modern Sigma lenses. So I'll have to do a little bit of work on that one. The same Vlog LUT behaves differently on log view assist, worse compared to real-time LUT. Is it possible to get the same behavior on LUT view assist as in real-time LUT? They will perform different because of where in the pipeline the LUTs are being used. Real-time LUT is much, much earlier in the imaging pipeline, and I would call it a smarter implementation of the LUTs. LUT view assist is a very straightforward, just dropping a view LUT on. So in some cases, a LUT that you design to be used for real-time LUT for baking in as the final look is going to perform different. What some people will do is they'll have a view version of the LUT, which is designed so that it accounts for the display and how the physical components of the camera for being able to actually see it in person are accounted for, because you're not looking at necessarily the same type of monitor that you're looking at on a computer for the final result. And over HDMI, you run into some other different challenges as far as like what is the luminance range that's being used. Like all of those things kind of come into play when you're doing view for the LUTs. And in some cases, you would want a LUT that is designed for view assist. That would be slightly different than a real-time LUT for the final product. Yeah, there can be some challenges with that. Unofficially, how splash-proof is the S9? Unofficially and officially, we do not comment or rate on any of that stuff because it's not rated as splash, dust, or freeze resistant. Nor do we use the word proof. I will caveat that with just saying that cameras have to be light tight. So, yeah. Could we ever get a phase detect upgrade to the original S1 like Blackmagic just did? No. The original S1 line, S1, S1R, they're done in firmware updates. We haven't published. The only things that I think we did was like there was a compatibility update for, I think, CF Express cards or something like that. You're not going to see development like that for the older cameras. They're just too old. Many people in the Discord want LRAW with no disadvantages. ProRes is way too big and has no open gate, and some people don't like external recorders because they're adding weight. I mean, it's fair, I get it, but that's just where we are. So, hi Sean, I want to see if you could explain why a 422 open gate intracodec is not possible in the S1 II. So I'm not necessarily the best at the moment to explain the differences, the benefits, and potential drawbacks of 422 versus 420 in how we implement things like open gate on the S1 II series, or honestly any of our cameras. I would more revert you to checking out stuff from like Connor McCaskill or Cam Mackey, people that are using these cameras, and compare them to other options like 422 from other companies to show you in a practical sense the benefit of what we can do with 422 10-bit in an HEVC compression versus what the others have to do in a 422 all intra, and where we still have better performance, especially with grading and, you know, kind of flexibility and richness, quote unquote, richness of the files. Outside of that, I don't really have a lot of technical information that I'm comfortable at this point expressing. I still need to do a little bit more research on the intricacies between them. One thing that I can say, though, is that when you go to things like all intra requires more processing in some cases. You can run into, because you're running higher bit rates for intra, because you need to have equally higher bit rate to support enough bit rate, you know, kind of spread across each of the frames versus a compressed H.265 with the colored resolution that you have there as well. It's not as simple as just 422 all intra is better than 420 10-bit in an HEVC. They're different. You also run into, you know, I go back to that compatibility thing. How common is hardware decoding of 422 10-bit HEVC? It's not as super common. Yes, MacBooks can do it, Mac OS can do it, that's great. However, you have to look at the global scape. PCs still outnumber Mac usage. And when you come into the PC world, my understanding is that you're looking at essentially the 50 series from NVIDIA that has hardware decoding for 422 10-bit HEVC compression. So you run into like, okay, this is cool, but if everything's got to be on CPU, then you get complaints from users that are like, this is great and all, but my PC is, falling over itself trying to be able to edit this stuff, and I have to transcode. And at that point, if you're having to transcode, and we can already do pretty much a parity performance on, color and flexibility outside of maybe fringe cases, that's where a lot of the stuff is. So a lot of it comes down to use case. It comes down to hardware capability. So just, yeah, like it is always being worked on, like what can be improved, how can we make it better, is this something that is well within the performance envelope of what the entire camera system is able to do. So is it going to put any undue thermals into it? All of that stuff has to be evaluated. So any multicam app updates? No updates on LUMIX Flow or LUMIX Lab at this point. So please make an S5 III or an S6 camera with a tiltable EVF. Okay. Thank you for your answers. My issue with LUMIX Lab editing. My phone is a Samsung Galaxy M23 5G with a Qualcomm. Okay. Yeah, Sebastian, that helps me do a little bit of digging into that. So with that, I'll have to check with the engineering team or the software team and see if that's something that they're aware of. In the meantime, one of the things that I have recommended that seems to have worked for some users is, one, double check to make sure that your that like the app permissions are set correctly, because you can run into a problem where, like, if you're trying to save the photo or something like that, but there's no, it's not being given access to certain things, sometimes that can cause a problem. Make sure that, like, if it really is crashing after you did an update to the camera or to the phone, to the app, try uninstalling the app and reinstalling it. Some phones, like I've had phones in the past where after I update an app, it just something breaks in the phone, and then when I uninstall the app and reinstall it, everything works fine. So I have had that happen before, because we are dependent on, in the Android side, the Play Store making sure that it delivers the download correctly. So yeah, some of that stuff, I would try some of those in the meantime while I propose this over to the engineering team to take a look at, or the app team to take a look at. Let's see here. What are your thoughts on just ditching mic in and HDMI and replacing it with triple USB-C with a general purpose HDMI and audio over USB support for consumer cameras like the S9 II? It's an interesting idea. The challenge that you run into more is not, is it technically possible, because the USB-C has basically all of that compatibility. It has a bunch of different alt modes for display, for audio, for data, in power. Like, it has all those different modes. The difference is, do the engines that are running our cameras have the ability to do it without adding a bunch of extra stuff to translate and make it connect with the processors that we use in the cameras? While yes, cameras are more and more like computers with every generation, the processors are still pretty purpose-designed ASICs. So they are designed for the purpose of creating images, photo and video, with the hardware that is, that it's being designed around. And the cycles for engine development are fairly long. So if for some reason, the engine's not designed to be able to handle USB-C, the alt modes that would be required, or it doesn't have the chipset needed for it, those are things that just become not possible unless you do a revision to the engines. And the engines are usually something that is a much longer term investment and time to build and develop and improve. A lot of that stuff does get, kind of in the process of like, hey, if we're going to build something, we need to be thinking years and years out, because you want to have it run for longer and you want to build headroom with it. But it doesn't always mean that those features are necessarily going to be able to get directly, deployed in as fast as people would want them to be. Do you think we'll ever get... I've answered the compressed RAW question a couple of times. And again, I need to be clear on this one. We have compressed RAW in the camera. I know people are going to come right back at me and say, well, but it's ProRes RAW and it's not that compressed. It is still compressed RAW. I'm going to go on a limb here and say that the vast majority of people have probably not shot Cinema DNG and how big those files are. It's a little snarky of a response, I know, but ProRes RAW is a compressed version of RAW. So you have that. Yes, it is higher bit rate, but that's because it still produces, from independent tests and studies, it is producing a solid image. Yes, advancements have gotten better, and there are different options out there. There's, Blackmagic RAW, and we have that. And yes, I understand the, not wanting to go over HDMI. Those are all totally valid, totally understand. But this is part of the thing. It's a little frustrating to me when I see, we don't have compressed RAW. Well, we do have compressed RAW. We don't have the compressed RAW you want. I think the more specific we can be with the questions that we ask, the better it can be. Because if someone says you don't have compressed RAW, well, again, it's just not true. We do have it. But if there is a specific thing you want to see improved, tell us, hey, I want to see a better compressed or smaller file size or stuff like that. It sounds like semantics online when, there's going to be chat forums and all that kind of stuff. But the more specific you can get, the clearer you can express what it is that people want to see or where they want to see advancements. It may sound like it's dumbing down the conversation, but the better the understanding is when that is being viewed by people that maybe take a very literal look or approach at certain things. So if I could ask anything of anybody, is if you've got questions and they're about things that you want to see us build in the future, try to be as specific as you can, because that actually helps remove questions, right? So we'll use the compressed RAW as a good example of this. People want to see a compressed RAW. Okay, well, what do you want to see from a compressed RAW? What are your priorities? Is it file size? Is it compatibility? What are the challenges that you want? Because there's always going to be give and take with some of these things as it becomes more and more viewed across the board. So let's see here. What are we at? We're about an hour 30. Cool. Use my S5D for video work, and there's too much delay on HDMI or for quick reactions. Can you update it somehow? There's not going to be an update to physically change anything in the camera for that. What I can recommend is, if audio is not an important component of what you're trying to capture, at least audio from the camera, try turning off the HDMI audio, and that will speed up the HDMI. Need help with AF settings. I use the S12E, and I have wanted to take photos using LUMIX Lab by myself holding something I want in focus, but it focuses on me, not what I'm holding. I'm usually holding the object in front of me, like a book or a color checker, passport, or even setting the focus box on the item. It won't focus. It's behind on me. So that, yeah, I mean, typically that's where, you're gonna, I would recommend checking maybe 1.AF, maybe turn human detection off, because if you've got human detection on and you're trying to put something in front of the subject, if it still detects the person, it's going to focus on the person, which would be you behind it. I say a lot because, if you look at the online YouTube space, for years on the online space, it was if someone's going to do a presentation to camera, it's like, you know, they cover their face and they hold the thing up so that it's not focusing on the body, and then you pull it away so that it's there, because eye detect can be very sticky for the eyes. I would probably try that, potentially just toggling off subject detection for a particular situation like that. I wish it would be possible to set manual EXIF data when I use manual lenses, just settings like you would for a normal lens. Focal length is already set for the IBIS, but it does not put in the EXIF data. That would be great. Yeah, I can definitely press that to the engineering team as well. For some reason, I thought with the modern cameras, if you program in, it puts the focal length in the metadata somewhere. Although maybe that might just be for photography, because I've looked at as far as photography goes a lot. So, the only lagging for us LUMIX uses the lenses. We need more S Pro lens options. So I mean that's one opinion for sure. But I'm willing to bet other people have different priorities as the only thing lacking. When will Sean Robinson be as cool as Matt Fraser? Aha. I see Matt's Venmo went through. I'm actually working on getting Matt back in with the live streams. So definitely keep an eye out for those streams. Yeah, we should be having Matt come back on. Regarding your answer about how about caring about users a bit more instead of competition, I'm asking for some S12 bug fixes for every year and they're still not fixed. So here's the thing. Firmware updates and future plans for things that you want to implement and develop. So things that we want to add to the cameras. This is where I think firmware update is a bit of a generic term. So as far as like bug fix firmware goes, so that's fixing things that are brought to the attention where there might be an issue, or there might be something that our engineering team finds that, like, hey, you know, this specific use case is broken and we need to push an update to fix it. Those usually you can't plan out. It's not like you plan bugs, you know, for future. So from the time that it takes to identify a potential bug, test to make sure that you've got a software fix for it, and then deploying can wildly vary. It can vary from something that is super quick and an update can be pushed within a week, to it could be something super complex that makes more sense to time with when the next feature addition is going to be, or stuff like that. So a roadmap just doesn't work in that particular case. So yes, you know, there are requests and there are comments about, hey, you know, well, let me take one step back, because there's also the perspective that what one person views as a bug may not actually be a bug. It may be that it's operating as intended, just not the way that a particular user would want it to work. So at what point is that a bug and more just use of the product, like intended use? So, and that's not saying that your particular comments or my particular comments or requests as far as features or capabilities or quote unquote bug fixes would be, you know, any less or more valid than the other. But there is a line of like, hey, this is the intended use case. Some people are going to call that a bug. Some people won't, because it's of how it's designed to use. So you can't necessarily plan for that, nor would you plan for that, because inherently a bug is a problem, something that is not as designed for intended use. So that kind of takes that whole thing out of it. Feature-wise, feature upgrades, things that we have in our plan that we want to do and we want to bring to these cameras that, you know, maybe some people ask for, maybe no one's asked for it, and it's something that we've got and we think that it's something that's going to change things. Those are never going to get published out into the public, because why would you give your competition the opportunity to potentially counter it? These are things that we are developing, we are proud of, that we want to deploy in our cameras, and capabilities that we have that are unique to us. It is not a thing about not caring about the users. If anything, I think it's actually oddly a bit more kind of like caring about user experience and why you want to use the Lumix cameras, because we develop things that are thought through, and when they're deployed on our cameras, they're solid and they work and they're great, and they're designed as we intended them to work. And more than anything, it's exactly why we do streams like this, why we have the Discord, why we talk, why we engage with everybody in the community, why we want you all to have this platform and be able to interact with us, because your feedback is what drives and builds our products moving forward. So great example is things like crop zoom and the frame markers. Those are things that came up because people have been telling us how you use your cameras. Things that we can solve, that we can fix for users, right? And if there's not some level of making sure that we can be the ones that deliver that to you, then businesses don't work. You gotta have to break the fourth wall a little bit here and be like, well, businesses are still businesses. They need to be able to produce things that you all need or want or desire. And I think we have the best track record, or one of the best track records, of actually delivering on the things that we do. There's also the other side of, you can state like, hey, we're going to have a firmware, in a year from now, but a lot can change between now and a year. And if you miss that deadline, if something comes up and through the development you realize, oh, hey, maybe that thing that we said is coming is not possible, there are big ramifications for that. So a lot of it is making sure that we can deliver on what we promise to you, that we can produce, cameras and hardware that do what they say they can do and provide better experiences for you. And along the way, your feedback is constantly being viewed, constantly being absorbed by our engineering team, by our planning team, to help inform what we do next, what our next steps are, whether that's software, whether that's hardware. So it is something that we're constantly working on, and finding that way that all of you can have your voice actually heard by the brand. And it's not necessarily, a select few that get to have their voices, heard. It's not necessarily a closed door conversation. I like to, kind of tout the fact that we do this, that you have that voice. And pretty much nothing's off the table. You can ask us anything, you can suggest anything. Doesn't always mean it's going to be doable, but, you have that access for us. L10 must be an insane larger success than Panasonic imagined. I ordered mine in May and still not got it. Titanium version on your website is also backlogged. Yeah, and it's exceeding even with us kind of having a pretty good idea of how potentially big like the demand is for this style camera. The fact that the vast majority out there are fixed lens, and the massive hole of a zoom lens option in that area, we still did anticipate like fairly strong performance with it. But y'all are just really definitely like, blowing our minds with just how much further over our already, kind of inflated expectations were with it. So, can you please give Blackmagic a call and implement B-raw codecs and camera? That would really give Lumix a leg up. Let me just get right on the phone. If you're mentioning Kamaki, he keeps repeating that internal ProRes RAW and the S12, S1R2 is chunks, so there's that. Well, I've had a lot of phone calls with Cam. There's differences in everyone's perspective on it. But one thing that I will say I don't necessarily like is people mentioning other people and stating something on behalf of them without necessarily asking them. So, yeah. Well, thanks for the live streams. Yeah, thanks for joining them. Can we get 8K photo mode on the S1R2 with a single picture instead of video like on the OG S5 with infinite buffer? The 4K, 6K kind of like photo mode option is pretty much gone. Yeah, I mean, technically you can just roll 8K video in OpenGate and you can just save the frames out there. You would just change what your shutter speed is, so you'd shoot super staccato in the video. So like high shutter speed, and then you can just grab the frame out. It is essentially what 4K photo, 6K photo was doing. Although the only other difference there is that they were shooting at a hard 30 frames per second, so it was actually like a photo frame rate. So, let's see here. Can you confirm S12 and S12E do have identical performing autofocus, or are there differences? I mean, they are the same algorithms, the same engine, the same overall, from a software and processor perspective. There are differences in the sensor. So the S12 does read out much faster. The S12E is essentially the same sensor as the S5 II and the S5 IIX, and the S9 for that, essentially the same. But the engine and the processor and algorithms like that are the same between the two. So any differences that you may experience are going to more come down to the sensor hardware and its capabilities of reading out versus an engine or an algorithm based system. So in that sense, they are identical, but you may have some slight performance differences between the two. The S12 being the speed, faster, like that kind of setup, because the sensor is faster. It's a great question. Why can't we see color temperature and shift when using automatic white balance? Maybe y'all can educate me on this one. I didn't know that, like, I don't think any of the cameras allow in auto white balance a readout of the color temperature in real time. That's not saying that it's the right way to do it, but I can't remember seeing any camera that allows, when you're in auto white balance, that it reads out the real-time color temperature for you. If they do, I would love to know, because I want to use that as kind of information to push back with the engineering team with. So, yeah. Okay, so they can. So I'll have to do a little more research. Honestly, I try to keep up on as much as I can with like what is possible out there, but obviously I'm only kind of, one person right here right now, so I can't always necessarily see everything. So yeah, I'll take a look and push a lot. Yeah. Let's see here. When you set a white balance, it displays the temperature and offset. Oh, okay. So, see, that's a little different. People are asking to show the temperature when using automatic white balance, like AWB. Auto white balance is going to constantly keep changing. So, and that's the one that I don't think I've seen anyone do. I get if I'm going to set a white balance, like if I'm going to like go in and say like, hey, I'm looking at this white balance card, I'm going to set it and I want to see the temperature there. I understand that one. And I honestly, I didn't realize that the other camera did that as well, but I will definitely bring that, as a little more information for it. So, can we please have separate lens ring binding for prime versus zoom lens? I want to bind crop zoom for prime lenses, pretty please. That is a really good suggestion. Let let me press that over to the engineering team. I don't know if that's possible. I don't know if there's enough like software room to do that, but I'll ask. Why is it no longer possible to see shutter count in the hidden menu? There is no longer any way to check how many clicks camera has. I think you answered your question with the question that you asked. The service menus in the camera are not meant for public use. The fact that there was some sort of power cycle count in there or shutter count were not things that were designed for end user use. They are service. They are for technicians' use. Going into those menus can cause pretty serious issues with your camera. Especially like if, you've got stuff activated on the camera, you go into there, you exit it wrong, and it's gone. And honestly, at that point, you went into a menu system that was not designed for you to be going into, and it screwed something up. You can throw off the stabilization calibrations, all of that kind of stuff. So the fact that it was in a menu that was not designed as something that was supposed to be user accessible doesn't mean we took anything away. Yeah. So I see a lot of that. I guess I can understand some people's perspective on it, but the fact that we don't have a menu option, whether you agree with it or not, or whether I agree with it or not, we don't have a menu option that is in the user's UI that shows, shutter count. Because let's face it, in modern cameras, it's also not as relevant as a benchmark for performance anymore, especially with cameras. So, yeah, there are many other things that could potentially go wrong before shutters go bad in modern day. It's not like it was, 15, 20 years ago. Let's see here. Cam was repeating that statement about ProRes RAW multiple times in his video. I'm not stating something on behalf of him without asking him. I'm not making things up as you suggest. I'm not suggesting that you were making something up. It's the if somebody says something in a video, post a link to the video or say to go check the person's comments themselves. I've had many conversations with Cam separately and with others about ProRes RAW. And I'll tell you, there are early opinions of ProRes RAW that may not necessarily be the same anymore. I'm not saying that's true in Cam's particular case now. In fact, I'll text him about it separately and just kind of see what's up. The difference is that there was an early time when people were using ProRes RAW and they weren't necessarily transforming the colors correctly from ProRes RAW to 709. They were just doing straight 709 conversion, and that's not what you're supposed to do. That does not produce a great image. Some companies' direct 709 conversion may handle things a little bit better. So there's a difference there. But yeah. Why has the comment section on your YouTube videos been disabled, even in a video that was asked to leave a comment? I mentioned this at the beginning of the stream. This is something that I'm working on. When we transitioned over to the global channel here, because we encompass globally now, the rules are a little different for the way the comment sections work, but I am working on it. So in the meantime, if you want to leave comments or kind of have something that we can talk about in future streams, you would want to get the best place to do that is to join the Discord channel. Join us over on Discord. Link is in the description. Because we have extended conversations over there as well. And especially if it's something like troubleshooting, those platforms can give us a much longer, or a better platform for discussing troubleshooting, going back and forth, instead of necessarily an open forum where I may not have the tools readily available to troubleshoot, everything. Let's talk about 3.3K mode in the S5 IIX. What was the philosophy behind that mode? I'm very curious. You mean the MP4 Lite, so the 3.3K, or 3.3K the APS-C crop? If it's the APS-C crop, 'cause I don't have an S5 IIX with me right now. I have a lot of the cameras. I just don't have one. It's in a Pelican. There are some modes on our cameras that are specifically designed for APS-C in 4:3 or 3 in 4:3 ratio because of the different capture standards like Academy, for like what lenses were designed for certain coverage. So when you start looking at some of those different resolutions and aspect ratios, they're typically because the resolution ends up being the maximum that we can do for the height with the 4:3 ratio, but then also within the confines of the sensor region that you'd be recording at for certain lenses. So it all kind of balances a little bit that way. Some modes are specifically for that. If you go way back to I think it was the GH5 when it first launched. It was GH5 or GH4. Like, it was legitimately just straight up called the anamorphic mode, like 4K anamorphic. So yeah, like there's little differences that way. Why does the camera use an APS-C instead of Super 35 crop? Essentially, they are the same exact thing. Super 35 versus APS-C. The difference is like a 1.5 to 1.5 to 1.6 crop. In modern day, the terminology is kind of just interchanged. It depends on what category your camera is. So cinema-oriented cameras, you know, the actually I forget, do the S1 II series call it APS-C or Super 35? Yeah, so like hybrid cameras are typically going to call it APS-C because it's a more broadly understood name for cropping into, you know, any 1.5 or a 1.3 crop. Sorry, a 1.5 or a 1.6 crop. Super 35 tends to be very much, you know, the more, you know, cinema terminology. So because of that, that's why the terminology gets kind of cross-used a lot. Like, even if you look at APS-C within all of the camera brands out there, there's a 1.5 and a 1.6 crop. Those are different crops. There is a different area that's being recorded between the two, but it's always just been called APS-C. You've also got APS-H, you've got APS-P, I think, which is the panoramic one. I think it was Tom Colton did a video on that, talked about it, I think. So it's that weird, you know, kind of it's that weird kind of position where, because common language or common English language has kind of co-opted both APS-C and Super 35 as meaning the same thing. From a technical perspective, yes, they are different, but in a practical sense, they're really not that different. They're not different enough, let's put it that way, for a lot of things. But you will see in the higher end cameras that they tend to be called Super 35 when the product is designed for an audience that they would call it Super 35. Cameras that have it designed or called APS-C are designed in an area where the more common used term for that crop would be APS-C. So, where do we go? Can we get the new picture styles from the L10 on the S1 II and S1 R2? I would love to see the new picture profiles coming across the line. I honestly have no idea if or when that kind of thing would happen yet. So I have my fingers crossed, though. I really want to see them because I really love L.Classic Gold. I know a lot of people think it's overplayed, but I really like it. If the GH series continues, please add battery grip compatibility like with GH5. GH7 has been fantastic, but the batteries are just not weather sealed. Oh, V-mount batteries are not weather sealed for intense use. Okay, I get you there. Yeah, it's a fair point. Yeah, I plan on shooting with that in a mini dock. What do you think? Art Vision. The 3.3K. Yeah, it can definitely be super useful. It's really all about that, like, what like what lensing you're using, because that's really what it was optimized for. Was just the various different optics that were designed to cover APS-C but be in a 4:3 ratio. But even there, in some cases, it can be super useful for you. So yeah, it's great. False color for the S5 II, S9, is it possible or not because of hardware? I'd have to double check. I don't know if it's a hardware limitation, because I know that the engines are slightly different between the two cameras, or the two series, the S1 II series and then the S5 II and the S9. So that I'm not fully sure about. But yeah, I would have to check with them to see. Could we share with the devs to work on face registration for autofocus? We can ask them. I don't know. We used to do face registration. This was years ago. There used to be like name registration and like all that stuff that you could do with the autofocus system. I think there are potentially there's potentially privacy challenges that you have to be aware of with doing stuff like that, because you're storing personalized information on the device. So it may be a little more complicated than just like, sure, could we do it? Probably. Is it something that's likely going to happen anytime soon? No. But yeah, we can bring it back up with them. All right, folks, we are at essentially 2 hours for this stream, and it looks like we've kind of slowed down on the questions. So I'm going to call it a stream there. So thank you, everybody. This was awesome. Tons of questions, tons of feedback. I appreciate each and every one of you that have joined, that have asked questions, that have asked challenging questions, that have asked easy questions, that have given your opinions and your feedback in, about our cameras, about pretty much everything. I say this a lot, but this is exactly what my vision for LUMIX Live was when we first started this, a little over, I think about 6 years at this point. Being able to give you a platform to be able to speak to us, to be able to voice your opinions. We may not always agree on things. We may not always be able to give you an answer right away, but knowing that you've got a platform where you can voice that feedback, voice your opinions, get your questions asked, troubleshoot some things from time to time, maybe learn something new about the cameras that you didn't know was possible. That's what this platform is for. So if you know people that would benefit from this, let them know that we have these streams. We have our next AMA stream set up for a month from now, because we're going to do those once a month. It's essentially going to be the beginning of the month, or the first stream of the month. If you want to continue these conversations, if you have more in-depth, like I see a couple people have done already over on the Discord channel, join us on Discord. Link is down in the description below, so that you can register. It should bring you right over to the channel. You can register, get yourself set in there. We have all the different channels available for things like troubleshooting and suggestions that you want to see us do in the future. There's support for, just kind of general conversation if we just want to chat. I do also have an AMA session that we do once a month over on Discord as well. So that one's over chat. A little bit, easier to do actual, like, longer run troubleshooting or back and forth with. But yeah, thank you all so much. If you liked this video, if you liked the conversation that we have, if you want to see more of these, give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you don't already. I think the vast majority of people typically do subscribe to the channel already, but if, maybe if this is your first time joining, maybe we earned a subscription from you. But definitely give us a like. Share this out to somebody that maybe you think might find benefit in joining these conversations or checking out the playback of these. For those that mentioned about the commenting on the video below, just bear with us a little bit longer, working on getting that changed out so that we can leave the comments on these particular videos at bare minimum. But yeah, join us over on Discord, links down in the description. I hope you all have a great rest of your day, great evening, great morning, wherever you are in the world. And most importantly, get out there, create some cool stuff, and if you see work from somebody creating something cool with a Lumix camera, give them props. Get out there, support each other in the community, support the beautiful, you know, content that people create in general with our cameras. And yeah, otherwise I will see y'all in 2 weeks. I will have the stream info set up for the one from 2 weeks from now soon. And yeah, other than that, I'll see y'all later. Bye.